Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And this is Trust Your Doctor, that podcast with newfangled solar toasters, because this week we watched The Space Pirates.
Written by Robert Holmes.
Directed by Michael Hart.
And aired from March 8th to April 12th, 1969.
You know, I'm just going to say right off the bat, we got a lot of people telling us to listen to the audio version of The Massacre with linking narration by Peter Purvis. Now, I'm not really sure if they released one of those for Space Pirates, but if they did, I didn't see anybody out here telling us to do that for Space Pirates. I didn't see anybody out here going, you should listen to the one with the linking narration. It really fleshes out the character of Clancy and why he's there and doing what he's doing.
Well, this one, I don't think suffers as much from being a recon as The Massacre. Maybe. I didn't think it was as... Well, okay, so my memory of this was that it was, like, as bad as The Massacre. But it's not. Like, rewatching it now, it's not great, but it's not, like... It's not the 0 out of 10 that I thought it was.
I don't think I ever thought it was a 0 out of 10. Pretty sure I always thought this one was, like, a solid 2 out of 10.
Still pretty bad.
Well, yes, I didn't say I didn't think it was bad.
That's like, you know, if you look at if your out of 10 scale is the same as the grading scale, that's like a low F.
Well,
so that's the thing is like people always come out and be like, well, 5 out of 10 isn't that bad because it's average, but like, yeah, if you look at this in terms of like American high school and college grades, then like you get 50% just by doing the thing. Like just turning in your homework gives you 50, and then it's just a 50-point grading scale from there. So 50% is actually pretty dang bad.
Yeah, but again, that just goes to show something we've talked about on this show before, which is that the American grading system has completely screwed with people's expectations on a 10-point scale, you know, where they think like 7 out of 10 is average and 6 out of 10 is bad and 5 out of 10 is the worst thing that was ever made. And then I guess you can just ignore all the numbers between 0 and 5.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I don't know why we're examining this so closely, but like that scale actually does conflate like the quality of the thing with like its existence in general. Like it gives you 50 points for just existing, and then it starts grading you on the quality. So there is like some sort of cognitive dissonance there where like half that scale is based on one thing and half of it is based on another.
Yeah, and I'm not out here to give Massacre 50 points just for existing, you know? I'm stringent with my points.
I'm subtracting 50 points for existing.
Its existence is a negative.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people, mostly on Twitter, have I think correctly pointed out that like we're really hard on The Massacre, and you know, maybe after having gotten some of our hatred out of our systems last week, we'll stop being as hard on it. I don't know.
Nope. Because it's funny. It's funny how people get so up in arms about this, in reality, completely inconsequential story. Like, who cares?
Sure, maybe. But maybe also sad how we just can't, like, let go of how much we despise The Massacre.
I think okay, here's the thing. Our episode on that should be going out right at this moment. And I don't think we were as hard on it as we were the first time around. Like, when I went back to edit it, I really don't think we were as hard on it as we were the first time around.
Maybe.
I think this time we actually put genuine effort in. I think even though we disliked it, we put in genuine effort into understanding the story. What little of it there was. Like this week. What little story there was.
I was about to say that's more than we can say for this week.
Once again, I put genuine effort into paying attention to this damn thing, and once again, I think I regret it. But hey, I'm determined to give every one of these stories their fair shake at changing my mind. So,
Well, okay, so before we jump into the plot, let's discuss some of the behind the scenes stuff, which I, for once, actually looked up.
once. Well, this was a thing we used to do religiously in the 11th Doctor era, and then when we got to the 12th Doctor era, it was just like nobody was recording any of this anymore, so we were just like, well, oh well.
Yeah, we kind of just stopped.
Well, it was impossible to find.
Well, okay, so this story is entirely a reconstruction other than episode 2, and the reason for that is that the BBC deemed episode 2 historically significant.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because episode 2 was the first story of Doctor Who filmed on 35mm film and not on videotape.
Also, the first one filmed in Television Centre 4, which was like apparently the BBC's new like premiere place to film television.
Yeah, episode 1 was recorded at Lime Grove Studios, which is where every story of Doctor Who until this point had been recorded. It was apparently notoriously troublesome to record there. I remember we got a little bit of a glimpse of that in An Adventure in Space and Time. Throwback to that. And so they built a new studio, the BBC Television Centre. I got all this from an interview that Loose Cannon did with Donald G., who plays Major Ian in this story, and who, by sheer coincidence, comes back in The Monster of Peladon
Oh, wow.
as a completely different character. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I got all of it from the Doctor Who wiki, and they probably got all of it from this interview.
This interview's really hilarious because after the first half of it, where he talks about the background of it, he kind of sets up the story, and then he ends it with, or somewhere near the end, it goes, the stage is set for a potentially exciting story.
Well, I'll give it that. It did have potential. I mean, the premise of this, I remember that's something we had read or heard about it way back when. Is like, the premise for this is pretty good, pretty solid, but the places it takes that premise are not.
Yeah, so apparently Donald G is like, science fiction was rapidly becoming science fact.
What?
With the moon landing only months away.
All right.
He theorizes that things of that lilt have inspired this story, like the moon landing and hard science fact. Because one of the things that some people point to is the fact that in this story, space is displayed as being dark on local scales with no stars to be seen, which potentially may have been influenced by pictures taken on the moon, or pictures taken in space in the moon program prior to them actually landing on the moon, where stars are not as visible as you might expect.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to the validity of anything that he's saying. It sounds a little, coming at this now in 2020, it sounds a little bit far-fetched, or it sounds like he's making big claims, like...
I don't know if he is, because then he's like, you look at Milo Clancy's vehicle, and he's like, guess what it looks like? Boom, exactly like the Saturn V rocket, which is what the United States used to get to the moon. He's like, is that a coincidence? Probably not.
Yeah, but it's like people have been writing stories about like landing on the moon and landing on Mars for decades at this point, so, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, but the point is just the grounded in factness of the whole thing. That I'm gonna go with that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. It's also grounded in like, what people are actually going to be doing once like space travel and industry gets this far, which is the same thing they're doing on Earth and being underhanded backstabbers and just exploiting everything and everyone around them.
Well, really think about it. Milo Clancy is not really doing anything wrong. Like, of all the characters in this story, he's the one character who you can kind of say is mostly blameless, because he comes in and he's like, I've been reporting these thefts to the government for months now, and you guys haven't done anything, so I figured I'd come out here and see what's going on for myself, and now you're arresting me. Like, wow. But we'll get there, because there's some more production information I want to talk about. Apparently, 2 whole stories for the season were just like not even written. They were like planned, and then they just got canceled for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, now that's a modern thing if I ever heard one. Plenty of movies these days start without the script being even finished. And it looks like this story did too.
Yeah. Well, so apparently this spot this season was going to be occupied by, guess what, but the Crotons. And the 2 stories before this were going to be a story called The Dream Spinner by Paul Wheeler, and then The Prison in Space by Dick Sharples. And then both those stories got canceled, or they didn't even get written. So what they did was they bumped the Crotons all the way up to like the 4th story in the season. And then, what was before this? Now I'm forgetting. Of course, I didn't write it down.
It wasn't The Wheel in Space, was it?
No, it was The Seeds of Death. The Wheel in Space was the one that introduced Zoe, so it couldn't have been that. The Seeds of Death.
Zoe was in this, so... I'm going to talk about Zoe later on, though, because there were many things that I forgot about her. I was reminded of by rewatching this.
Yeah, so Brian Hales writes The Seeds of Death, bringing back the Ice Warriors. And then Bob Holmes is like, he sits down and pulls a Terry Nation, and he turns in a script, and it's called The Aliens in the Blood. And the show was like, yeah, no, not happening. But Bob Holmes, undeterred, went back to the drawing board and came back and was like, how about the Space Pirates? And they're like, you know what? Sold, Bob. You got it. Probably because no one else was willing to just slam out a story in like no time at all for the show.
Well, like The Massacre, that kind of makes sense. This wasn't exactly a great story, so it makes sense that it was just written not on a whim, but like on a dime.
Yeah, well, Mr. G is like, there's no monsters in this story. And then he casually goes, the fact that there was no budget for creating monsters for this story may have played a part in that. And I was like, oh. He basically was like, yeah, most of the budget for this story actually went to the war games. So much so that week 6 of filming for the story was cut short by the fact that they needed it to film more stuff for the war games. So that's why like the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe appear in like pre-recorded inserts in like episode 6.
Yeah, the war games was one of the longest stories of the classic Who era. So
second longest after Dalek Invasion of Earth.
Yep.
The good old days when we were excited about Doctor Who.
I'm excited about it now still. More so
but
than
not
I
the
have
way
been.
we used to be. I went back. I'm going to just say this now. I went back to the 3rd Doctor retrospective, our Planet of the Spiders episode.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to recall what we had said was the worst 3rd Doctor serial. Because I remember it being perhaps not as clear as the 1st and 2nd Doctor. And while I was listening, we were really energetic. We were really excited, very optimistic. No hints of cynicism there. And I was like, damn, in the past 4-5 years, we've become really cynical.
Well, that's because every time we got our hopes up, the show just shot them down.
We were talking so excitedly about like how great the Planet of the Spiders set looks, and the Metebelis crystal, and the overarching plot line about, Metebelis 3, and the Doctor and Joe Grant's departure being brought into this somehow. And we were talking about how excited we were to meet the Master finally, and...
Yeah, well, this podcast has really just been like, a game of basketball, one-on-one between like someone who's like 5'6" and someone who's like 6'5", like there's just every time we try to make a shot, the show just slaps it out of the air.
What a strange analogy. What? I will say our audio quality went way up since that episode, at least until this quarantine started.
Yeah, well, hopefully, this episode is much better
We're still working out the kinks with the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know why my audio has like just gone to hell in the past weeks because it wasn't initially, but hopefully it's back to being as good as it was.
We're trying our best here. Trying our best here. Anyway, that's all I have for the production for the story. At least it's everything I have written down.
Yeah, I just have that this is actually the first story that JNT worked on. Apparently, he was an uncredited floor assistant.
Yes.
I don't know where the Doctor Who wiki got that info.
Oh, yeah, that comes from the... Okay, so if you watch this little interview with Donald G., he says it too, and then they show like an actual, like... I don't know where the hell I found this, but it looks like an actual, like... What is it called? It's like a calling card for the people who are supposed to be on set that day of filming, and JNT's name is on it as floor assistant.
Huh. Interesting.
So I do like, also I want to mention that at one point Donald G, and maybe this is something to talk about later on because it's not something I would have immediately noticed, but he just goes, Lisa Daniele plays the lady in it, and I'm like, wait, what? And then watching it, I was like, yeah, actually, she's the only female character in this entire story except for Zoe, who is a regular character, so don't really count her.
Right.
And I was like, wow, Bob. Wow, nice going, Bob Holmes. So that's something I actually want to talk about later on.
Sure.
That thing. But that's all my production information.
Yeah, that's all I had. So I guess we can just launch into this masterpiece.
Yeah, so right off the bat, apparently this has the longest... or one of the longest periods between the first episode starting and the Doctor actually showing up, clocking it at a monstrous 15 minutes before the Doctor even shows up in the first episode.
Yeah, I noticed that. Especially because after about, 7 or 8 minutes, I realized that these characters were not, like, compelling at all. And
yeah, the Space Force, or whatever the hell their name is.
No, that's the real agency.
I know.
That's its own entire podcast in itself.
And a TV show now made by Netflix.
Yeah, well, okay, so, before we jump into these characters, let's touch on, like, the because we start with, like, I think some model shots and stuff, and all the model stuff in this episode is pretty good. It's the
model looks really pretty good.
Yeah, I really like the design of all these ships. You could tell Robert Holmes had created this entire, like, sci-fi backstory / world, because we get all these, like, named ships, like the Beta Dart and a couple other ones.
The Liz 79, which is Milo Clancy's.
Right, and all the models are, like, very unique and designed to reflect what type of ship they are. But of course, Doctor Who being Doctor Who, this is kind of just its own self-contained thing. We never hear about Beta Darts ever again. We never see any of these ships ever again. So it almost kind of felt like Star Wars, where there's all these, like, different iconic ships and such. Except unlike Star Wars, it's just dropped.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the only things or technologies that Doctor Who has consistently brought back and consistently references is TMAT, which you have to wonder, like what is TMAT's longevity? Like, why was that the technology that people were just like, TMAT, that's the one? Like, we never see the freaking zoetrope thing from Carnival of Monsters ever again. Like,
maybe because TMAT is like a very useful plot thing, like, I don't know.
It's like we never see these Space Force. I'm just gonna call them the Space Force. The Space Force.
They had a name.
Uniforms.
Yeah.
It was Space something.
Yeah, their uniforms, I felt were very not well designed.
I mean, be that as it may, my point. Oh, Space Core. Be that as it may, the point still stands. We never see these again.
Yeah. So I mean, this story does like do a lot more so than many Doctor Who stories, even to this day. I would say to like craft its own sci-fi universe. You know.
Right.
But again, Doctor Who being Doctor Who, we never see any of this stuff again.
That might be, too, because Bob Holmes apparently was like, I want this to be, we mentioned this in the thing, the production notes, but this is very much Rob Holmes being, I want this to be a Western, but in space. And at some parts, being so lazy as to just literally put a Western character in the story and not even try and mask it at all. But he wanted it to be like, a variation on like the Star Trek idea, because Star Trek was pitched as a Western in space. It was Wagon Train, but in space. Wagon Train being a Western television show from, I believe, the 50s or maybe a little earlier. So there are clearly, in my mind, very many similarities between this and that Star Trek kind of ideal with the very the model work and the very specific detailed ship designs and the varied geopolitics of the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. Some of that comes crashing down when you see the uniforms and like the Space Corps logo just slapped everywhere they could find room for it on the uniform.
I mean, that sounds like what the Space Force is going to be doing, so maybe the Space Corps is
ahead of their time.
So we begin by seeing the beaded dart robbing some sort of like space station thing.
It's the beacon, right?
Yeah, but it's not the beacon we see later. It's a completely different beacon. They rob this beacon, and then the Space Corps. So General or Major Hermack. Just what a name, too. What a name. Hermack. But anyway. Hermack hears news of this and decides, just unilaterally, without orders from Space Corps Command, he's just like, well, you know what, guys? Boys, crew, boys, because there's no woman on this crew, apparently. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go after these pirates. We're gonna go after them. We're canceling our mission. We're going after the pirates. And this is our first indication that the time scale of this whole story is just going to be completely screwball, because they're like, it's going to take us like 6 hours to get there. Or something ridiculous like that. And then for the whole rest of the story, like, travel times between places are like, it's going to take us 2 hours to get there. And I'm like, oh God, oh God.
What you say when you start this story, oh boy, it's going to take me 3 hours to get to the end of this. Well, it's kind of like what they did in Blake 7, where they didn't like, like in the very first episode of Blake 7, or maybe the second, they're like, yeah, it's going to take us 6 months to get to God, why am I blanking on what the, God,
Cygnus Alpha.
Oh, yeah, Cygnus Alpha. Which was not like, that was a little bit of like, they don't have super fast space travel in this world. But then maybe they do, because they like the time scale gets totally turned on its head later on.
They threw that out a week later because they realized they didn't want every story to take place 6 months after the last one.
Well, they got the Liberator, so that like really improved on things. But there was that like weird time discrepancy in Cygnus Alpha where the Liberator and the London get to Cygnus Alpha at the same time.
Yeah. There's the other weird thing where like what's trying to think now. Yeah, where Servalan just always shows up like almost at the same time as Blake every time. And you're like, where was Servalan coming from that she could get there within the span of the story?
Well, I think the technology, like Blake 7 takes place over the course of several years, so I think the technology improves, because like at the beginning we don't hear about time distort whatever, but then near the end of the show,
5 or whatever.
Yeah, but like in series C and D, like that's every other word is like, all right, set the speed to time distort whatever. So I think the technology actually improves to kind of match the Liberator's standard by, X.
Well, also, like, the general measure of speed changes halfway through this story. I seem to remember that before Time Distort, they were using, like, a completely different measure, and then they never explain, like, the difference. Anyway, we're, like, way off topic here. So they go to... All right, so here's the thing. General Hermack and Major Ian are talking. And first off, I only remember Ian's name because it reminded me of Ian Chesterton all the time. And they kept saying it. They're like, Ian, Ian, Ian. They're talking, and Ian's like, there are like 17 beacons. We've got like a 1 in 17 shot of patrolling the correct beacon that they're going to hit. And immediately off the bat, they're like, so these criminals are hitting our beacons because they're made of pure Argonite. And Argonite is a very valuable mineral. And my first note was, so why the hell would you make them out of Argonite then? But they do explain that later on. I just wish they had explained that earlier because I was left wondering for like 2 whole episodes. I was like, why the hell would you make it out of Argonite? But so here's where the time thing gets screwy because they're like, well, there are 4 beacons in this one system. So if we go there, we can patrol all 4 at once. But then they go to that system, and later on in episode 1, they explain that somehow they're not even at another beacon, but it's going to take them 2 hours to get back to the beacon they were just at. And they're leaving them there for 2 months!
Yeah, well, I mean, that also, like, begs the question of, like, how small is this solar system that you can just go there and patrol all 4 at once? Like, how do you have all 4, like, in your sights? Like, I guess they have radar and such, but,
And how slow is their goddamn maximum boost? You thought we had Time Distort? No, we've got maximum boost.
Well, looks like the Space Corps really needs to get their acts together.
Yeah, because they can only maintain maximum boost for like 20 minutes before they burn out the engine.
All of this honestly kind of makes me like the story a little more, like Space Corps is really not like the tight ship that you might think it is.
Space Corps, much like the real Space Force, is the most underfunded branch of the space military.
Wait, so there's more branches of the space military?
In the future. I'm just waiting for the Space Navy.
No, okay, so the Space Force is like the Space Air Force, right? So that means we need like a Space Army and a Space Navy, Space Marines.
Space SEALs.
Yeah, Space Navy SEALs.
Space CIA, Space FBI.
Space, like, Rangers.
Jeez. Well, so this is interesting because, like, so Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, even though he pitched it as a Western in space, he was a Navy corpsman as himself. So when he designed the, like, how the Starfleet works in that series, he actually based it around the Navy and not the Air Force. So this is, like, weird that, like, in real life, the Space Force is based on the Air Force because, like, the public consciousness of what a space paramilitary organization is like so rooted in Star Trek, which was based on the Navy. So,
yeah, that's also weird because, like, the Navy actually has more planes than the Air Force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Air Force is, like, so unmanned now with drones. But anyway.
Yeah.
So the pirates... Okay, so Sorba and Warren, they get onto Beacon Alpha 4 and start stripping it for Argonite. And they're like, ha, no one will be on this beacon. Smash cut to, wow, wow, wow. And the TARDIS shows up. But I have to pitch shift that down like 2 octaves in post. But anyway. The Doctor shows up and he's like, well, Jamie, Zoe, where are we? And they come out into like a locked room and they're like, well, we should be going now. But then the pirates just burst the door down and they're like, well, never mind. Guess we're not going.
Right.
Meanwhile, also on this beacon, so the pirates have actually hit another beacon before they get to Beacon Alpha 4. I guess they're just hitting all these beacons like today. They're like, move up the time scale. They have hit another beacon, and Hermac's cunning plan to disrupt their operation is to leave a bunch of his crew on Beacon Alpha 4 for 2 months with emergency rations to survive on.
Yeah, I forgot about that, so I didn't pick up on it.
And I guess his hope is that the pirates will hit that beacon in the next 2 months. Well, lucky for him, they hit it literally today. But not before General Hermac and his ship, which also had a name that the V41-LLLO, I think. But it's just called the V41 mostly. The V41 moves so far away from Beacon Alpha 4 that it's going to take him 2 hours to get back, and they can't use maximum boost for that whole time.
Yeah. And then the beacon, all we're left with is that the beacon just explodes.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know if you picked up on this, but Hermac picks up an accent for one line in the whole episode.
Yeah, I did.
At the end of episode 1, they're like, it's going to take us 2 hours. And he goes, we are going to be too late again. And that's the only time he has an accent for the entire serial.
Like he's supposed to be Russian, right? I mean, I forgot what his first name is, but like it was something that made me think he was supposed to be Russian. And that the guy who played him just didn't do that the accent for it other than just for one line.
Yeah, Nikolai Hermac.
Yeah,
he does it for that one line and just nowhere else in the entire story. Jack May, what are you doing, you absolute madman?
Reminds me, I don't know, maybe there was some sort of behind the scenes thing that went down that made him only do it for one line. Which kind of I don't know why it reminds me of this, but the character Jesse in Full House, right? The sitcom, mm-hmm. He threatened, I think, to leave the show unless they retconned his character into being Greek because John Stamos is Greek in real life. So they yeah.
Be the most petty thing.
So Uncle Jesse actually has a different last name in the first season, and then they changed it to something Greek. And seasons 2 and onward.
Wow. Wow. You have to wonder how John Stamos was such a bankable name that he could threaten to do that, and the studio actually was like, oh shoot, we can't lose John Stamos.
Yeah, especially because Bob Saget is also on that show, who's potentially a bigger name than him.
Oh man.
But for perhaps all the wrong reasons. I don't know if you've ever seen Bob Saget's stand-up, but it's some of the most vulgar stand-up in existence.
Which it makes it even more hilarious that he's on this family show.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, I found out this week that Larry David had a cameo appearance on Hannah Montana. Because apparently his daughter was a really big fan of the show, so Larry David got on the show for her, and she got to be on the show because he was on the show too, and they have a cameo appearance in a restaurant, and they have multiple speaking lines, and Larry David's just playing himself from Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, I'm sure all those kids watching Hannah Montana are huge Curb Your Enthusiasm fans.
Well, the best part is that his kid in the episode makes a reference to Uncle Jay, which is obviously supposed to be Jerry Seinfeld, but none of the kids would get that. So anyway, I just thought that was wild.
That's actually all of this entire scenario is a Curb Your Enthusiasm style joke of we're gonna do this, but nobody's gonna get it,
I mean, really though, like if you go to watch it, you can find it on YouTube. He's acting basically exactly like his Curb Your Enthusiasm character. So it's like this weird, like, is this the same universe? Is this the same character in a different universe? Like, what's going on here? Is it also like, I feel like if you're not of a teenager or post-teenager kind of age group, the Curb Your Enthusiasm humor like doesn't land for you. So like,
yeah, what's that meme? Infinity War is the most ambitious crossover of all time.
It's actually the Curb Your Enthusiasm Hannah Montana crossover.
Larry David dies in Infinity War. That was the other meme of like just insert, character here dies in Infinity War.
Well, so in episode 2, first off, we find out they're 50 days away from home planet, which is, I guess, the home planet of the Space Corps, or just the home planet of the human civilization.
We never find out what planet this is, but there's like some oblique references to potentially it being Earth. Milo Clancy references bees at some point later on in the episode. And we actually get, I think it's in episode 2 or maybe 3, but we get that like Milo Clancy was one of the first like people in space.
Yeah, his ship is like 50 years old or something. The Liz 79.
Right.
So
maybe the 79 is actually a reference to the moon landing and all that stuff was going down in 69. So maybe they're like, yeah, by 1979 we're probably gonna have like the ability to travel like far into space and like we're gonna expand into space and stuff. So we'll just call it the Liz 79 because it was one of the first made in 1979.
Right.
Or maybe not. Anyway, they lose signal from the pirate ship because they're tracking it and they lose the signal or something, and they like lose track of Sorba as well.
Yeah.
And there's a line, I forget who says it, but I think it's Ian. He's like, there's no chance anyone's left alive after that explosion. And then you cut to like the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe alive.
Well, they come up with the most nonsense explanation as to why that is. And that's because the station didn't actually blow up. It's just held together with magnetism, and all the magnetism was turned off.
I really liked this little segment.
It was okay.
I liked the, I don't know, I guess I can't like really articulate why, but I liked the like reveal that like it was held together via magnets and like the explosion just knocked the pieces a little further away from each other, and that they're like, this was all, well, I guess I liked that it was all part of the master plan, so to speak, because what they reveal is that like now all the different components of the beacon are traveling at the same speed, just a little ways away from each other in the same direction.
Yeah, presumably being towed to somewhere.
Right. So this was all part of the plot to get the Argonite to, wherever the destination is.
Mm-hmm.
But they're stranded. The Doctor and Jamie and Zoe are stranded on one part of the beacon, and the TARDIS is on another.
Yeah. And so they're running out of oxygen, and there's like an oxygen tank there that they slowly vent into the air. And there's this hilarious scene between Zoe and Jamie where Zoe's like, haven't you noticed it's getting hard to breathe? And the way Fraser Hines plays this is like Jamie only just realized now that Zoe pointed it out that it's hard to breathe, and he was just gonna keep on trucking along like nobody's business if she hadn't pointed it out, which I appreciated. That small acting touch from Fraser Hines. You really miss those things when you're only watching reconstructions.
Yeah, I forgot how much I enjoyed the Second Doctor, Jamie and Zoe as a group.
Right.
Yeah. Forgot. Yeah, I forgot how much of like a know-it-all Zoe was, and then I also forgot how much like Jamie
Doesn't know
like
anything?
no no. Well, I mean, I don't know. I forgot how much like he had a friendship with the second Doctor and stuff.
He
I
was
forgot
there
how
for
like
literally his entire run, except for
yeah,
the first story.
I forgot how high pitched Fraser Hines' voice was.
It's interesting. While we were watching this, I thought it was interesting, and most noticeably in episode 2, when the Doctor's explaining magnets to Jamie, how we talked last week in the massacre how the production team thought it would be a problem to have Katarina and then later Anne Chapelet as companions because they were from earlier centuries and didn't have the knowledge that a modern day companion would have, the scientific mostly knowledge. But then when they got to the second Doctor's era, they made a Highland Scotsman work as a companion like really well, even though he's from not necessarily a similar time period, but you know, from a time period much earlier in human history than the present day.
Yeah, and they even actually do this with Zoe. I'm surprised that they like had this little bit of I don't know what you would call it, like world building type stuff instead of just glossing over it because later on when they light a candle, Zoe goes like, "Oh, what's that?" And that's something that makes you go like, "Oh yeah, like wow, she really wouldn't know what a candle is."
Mm-hmm.
Because she herself is from the future.
Yeah, with their futuristic, sparkly, sequined cat suits.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly along, Milo Clancy is introduced in episode 2.
Yeah. I remembered this character. I forgot almost everything from this
So
story,
you're
but I
saying he's
remembered
memorable.
Milo Clancy. Yeah, but I didn't remember the voice.
You didn't remember his old-time prospector voice? How could you forget Milo Clancy?
Yeah. So, not the greatest attempt at like an American accent, but perhaps not the worst in this story alone. You know, Ian has his own little American accent going on, and there's a line that I specifically noted down because his accent is not great, where he goes, he's trying to say that Milo Clancy has no respect for the law, but he's doing it in like an American accent. So what he ends up saying, due to his own, British accent, is that he has no respect for the lore. Kind of hearkening
Like Chris
forward
Chibnall.
to Chris Chibnall. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, I don't think Milo Clancy is supposed to be American so much. He's just supposed to be a prospector, an old-timey prospector, which is what I was referring to when I said Bob Holmes gets so lazy to just drop a literal Western character into the story without any sort of I don't know what the word
change
I'm
as
looking
to
for.
like how space would affect that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's like a lot of space Western shows do that, like Firefly, whatever, Cowboy Bebop. It's just like, why don't we just take these Western things and throw them into space?
Well, I mean, that's what this whole story does, which is something that I actually liked about this story, is that once you kind of start to pick up on that, you start to see it all play out, like the conniving business woman who's trying to get her profits by stealing the Argonite, the criminals stealing the Argonite, much in the same way that, criminals would like rob trains back in the Westerns, the lawmen, the sheriffs, that's the Space Corps, basically. And once you start to see all those tropes emerge, it starts to become pretty clear in my mind, like, if this is actually a pretty clever adaptation of the Western tropes to space, except for Milo Clancy.
Yeah, there's no real, visually, I think they don't actually just transport the Western stuff into this, which is why it takes a while for you to understand that, like, okay, yeah, this is just a Western style story in space. But again, like you said, with Milo Clancy, it's just like a very clear, like he's wearing a plaid shirt, for God's sake.
He's eating a boiled egg.
Yeah. It was actually funny, like his introduction scene where he just keeps getting interrupted and he can't eat his breakfast. Which is, that's what happens right now. He gets interrupted and he's sort of brought in by Hermack.
And Hermack interviews him and then lets him go. And then Hermack turns to Ian and he's like, "You're never going to believe this, Ian, but I have this cunning plan where I think Milo Clancy is leading all the pirates." And Ian's like, "Milo Clancy just told us that the pirates have been stealing from him for months and he's been reporting them to us. You really think he's like in charge of them?" And Hermack's like, "Yes, it's a cunning ruse, isn't it?"
"Don't you agree? Is C agree?" And she's just like,
Yeah.
So, okay, in the midst of this, we actually cut to the doctor. Well, actually, I think this is going back, but I have this in my notes, and I just want to mention it. So, when the doctor and Jamie and Zoe are passed out, the doctor actually wakes up first, and he goes and like gets a little fire extinguisher from the corner, and he brings it over to where Jamie and Zoe are, and then like the very next scene with them, everyone is awake. So we never actually see like what the doctor does with that fire extinguisher and how he wakes them up.
I think it's an oxygen tank.
Yeah, probably. It makes a lot more sense. I thought he just like beat them over the head with a fire extinguisher.
Well, also when they're running out of oxygen and they're breathing the last of their breaths, the doctor says something like, "I don't need as much as you." And I was like, is this the first time Bob Holmes is slipping in the doctor needing less oxygen than humans? Like, is this Bob Holmes' first foray into adding lore to the doctor's character? Might be.
Did Robert Holmes come up with the 2 hearts thing?
Robert Holmes is responsible for like most of what we know of the doctor.
Yeah, but I can't remember if he came up with the 2 hearts. And if not,
I want to say that was Spearhead. That was introduced in the 3rd Doctor's era, I want to say. So
I have no idea.
Very possibly.
Yeah. Well, even if not, whoever did create it was maybe even looking back at this story and wondering why the Doctor needs less oxygen, and maybe that's why.
Possibly. Someone out there, some guy on the show is just really into the history of Doctor Who, reading into this one line, like, yes.
Especially in an era where you couldn't rewatch the episodes unless they decided to play them again.
Well, so episode 2 ends with them dying, and then episode 3 begins with Clancy. Well, yes, episode 2 ends with them dying, and then Clancy busting the door down and shooting Jamie. And then episode 3 begins with Jamie kind of lying on the ground and Zoe going, "You killed him," and Clancy going like, nah, I just stunned him. And then he goes like, "Oh, you're like a Scotsman and like a dandy and then like a woman." And it's like, you can't be in charge of the pirates. Like, you can't be the pirates. And the doctor's like, "What pirates?"
Yes.
And so they get rescued by Milo Clancy. Milo Clancy, I should mention, carries his gun around this whole story like he's carrying a pickaxe around, which cannot be accidental.
Yeah. I'm just looking at my notes here, and I think I kind of screwed up how I took my notes.
Well, that's okay, because I took detailed notes again. So this is when they finally explain why the hell the beacons are made of Argonite, which is because Argonite is apparently practically indestructible. Which is why they built the beacons out of it, because they needed the beacons to be strong. Duh.
Yeah. It looks like I probably don't need to reveal this, but it looks like I took my notes like in the wrong order. Like I put some episode like 5 and 6 notes under where I have episode 3. But whatever, it doesn't matter. We need to dwell on that.
The reconstruction uses the same video of Hermack crossing from one side of the room to the other every time he goes to pick up the like communicator to speak with his ship. So yeah, we forgot to mention there's a planet in the system called Ta, sorry. And this is where we meet Madeleine, who runs the like Argonite mines for this system and this sector of space. And we also just basically just get this plot dump where like Hermac's like, but didn't you have a thing against Milo Clancy? And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, wasn't there like evidence that he might have killed your father? And she's like, well, yeah, but no one ever proved that, so I just let it go. And he's like, interesting. So you and Milo Clancy, you hate each other, right? And she's like, no, I literally I don't care about Milo anymore. He's like, right, that's what I said. You hate Milo.
Well, he was part of her father's company or whatever, but she ousted him on the basis that he might have killed her father, but other than that, she just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, Hermione Company just bought some beaded darts as well.
Yeah.
And their cunning protection so that they don't get shot down is a striped nose cone. Yowza. Madeleine. This is the first indication to me that Madeleine is totally in on this, by the way.
It's pretty dang... I don't know if this is just me subliminally remembering it from last time, but it is pretty dang obvious that she's behind it all.
Yeah. It's super suspicious. So, meanwhile, elsewhere on the planet, but nearby, Milo Clancy lands because Milo believes that Madeleine would still help him, that she doesn't hate him like everyone thinks she might, which he's actually right. And so he lands and goes out to check if the coast is clear, and while he's gone, Zoe's just like, hey Doc, guess what? The TARDIS must have landed nearby, right? Or something like that. It's all got to be nearby based on the speed everything was moving. The Doctor's like, I guess.
They do this whole deduction and calculation as to why the TARDIS is nearby, but I forgot completely what any of it entails.
It's something about the speed of electromagnetic fields in free space and calculating how far off course their pod must have gone.
Yeah. Either way, the result of this is that they decide to just wander off. Yep. Which I think Milo Clancy actually says, hey, stay put, or else you're going to get lost. It's a very complicated tunnel system. And, they wander off and they're like, we'll be fine. And, the very next scene is we're lost, aren't we?
Yeah. And also, hilariously, this is hilarious. The cliffhanger episode 3, this is only hilarious because it's the reconstruction, so the visuals don't quite come across. But the caption at the bottom of the screen is a floodlight is moved towards them by some guards.
Yeah, well, okay, so they stumble across the pirates' hideout, and then they get caught. Yeah, and they get caught by Kevin, who
moves a floodlight towards them.
Who moves the floodlight towards them. And episode 4 starts with him shooting at them, and they fall down a little shaft of some sort and land in a little makeshift prison, where they find who else but Sorba.
Yeah, who else?
So Sorba's still alive.
There's the wiki mentions a humorous thing because they get shot and fall down that hole at the end of episode 3, and then at the beginning of episode 4 they do the same thing, and the wiki is when they fall down the hole in episode 3, you can hear their voice for a minute falling, but in episode 4, when episode 4 starts, it's 10 seconds.
Yeah, so I think episode 4 is more accurate to what at least what we can gather from the recon, because it just seemed like they fell far enough or they fell into a pit that's deep enough that you would not be able to climb out of it, yet at the same time is not a massive fall that would severely injure you. You know?
Yeah. But
the Doctor deduces that there's actually another way out, because there's a little bowl of water, and he's like, yeah, if the way we fell in here is the only way in, there's no way they could have gotten that bowl of water in here. So there has to be another way out.
Yeah, and they find the door and then proceed to spend the rest of episode 4 trying to open it. Because it's an audio lock. So they need to find the right tone to open it up. And the Doctor just pulls a tuning fork out of his pocket and starts banging it against the wall. And eventually Jamie just gets sick and tired of this. And I actually remember this scene from this era for some reason. Jamie just grabs the tuning fork out of the Doctor's hand and launches it at the wall, and it bounces off the wall, and somehow that causes it to put the correct tone out, and the door opens, and the Doctor's like, "You did it, Jamie. You found it."
Yeah, I really like this. Just goes to show you that, like, whenever you're trying to do something, getting frustrated and fed up is the way to go, because that'll lead you to where you need to be. But yeah, there is some element of like the episode 4 slowdown, like here.
The episode 4, 5, 6 slump.
Things just come to a halt.
Things do come to a screeching halt because I only have like 5 notes for episode 5 when I had been having like 10 to 15 for the previous episodes.
Yeah, so it turns out that the person on the other side of the door was actually Milo Clancy, and now they essentially have to fight their way out because pirate guards have figured out that they've escaped, and we get some wonderful CG guards from Loose Cannon. Yeah.
Milo Clancy gets to be the Doctor too and go, "You guys should have listened and stayed where you were, and you wouldn't be in this trouble." And I was like, yeah.
The Doctor's like, in his head, he's like, "I'll remember that line."
I wrote boring shootout, but I legitimately don't remember anything about this shootout.
Well, they just make their way down the corridor eventually to Madeline Isigi's ship, which is connected to all of this, and they break into the room, and Cavan is there, and Madeline is there, and they get captured.
Madeline's like, "I was in on it all along." This is the thing. Milo Clancy at first thought Madeline might be in on it, but then changes his mind because he's like, "Madeline wouldn't do that." And then turns out he was right the first time that, yep, Madeline is in on it.
Yeah, but she's not fully in on it because she never agreed to killing people.
Oh, no.
Which Cavan wants to do. He's trying to convince Madeline to have them killed because otherwise their plans are going to go awry.
Oh, no. The plans are going to go awry. I care so much about these space pirates and their Argonite.
Well, okay, so what they end up doing, I think this is into episode 5. First of all, Sorba gets shot and killed, we should mention.
Yeah, rip Sorba.
And then the rest of them are brought into Dom Isigri's study. Dom Isigri is Madeline's father, who was killed by potentially Milo Clancy.
Yeah, and he's just hiding under the table in this office. Now, I wrote a note. I was like, why are we in this ancient house again? I don't remember them getting into that ancient house.
Well, I actually, no, okay, so this is just a single room on the ship, and I actually like this because this is like just one Western, like, thing that exists. Like, you know, you're in this future, like, space age, like, place, and then you go into this room and bam, you're in the Old West. And I actually really liked that. That actually kind of justifies, now that I think about it, Milo Clancy's entire character, because it's like, you know, before Law and Order or whatever was brought to, before the Space Corps really made their mark on space travel and such, like, space was actually like the Old West, and it was just like this place that was kind of like the 1800s. But then the Space Corps showed up. But then the Fire Nation attacked. Okay, no. Never even watched that show. But anyway.
Same.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of like that. I didn't realize while watching it, but it actually does put Milo Clancy's entire vibe into perspective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's this whole thing that Dom Isigri was also an old-timey prospector with Milo Clancy.
Right.
We forgot to mention that Hermac's justification for why Milo would be running the gang, the Space Pirates, is because his mine, Milo Clancy owns a mine of Argonite, and which you would think would make him rich. But anyway, he owns a mine, but Hermac has heard that the mine is all mined out and is out of Argonite.
Right.
So he thinks that he's stealing this Argonite now to sell because his mine is all mined out. Turns out he wasn't so far off base. He was just pointing his finger at the wrong mine owner.
Right. So we find out that Dom Sigri is actually alive and has been this entire time.
Yeah.
Which I guess it would be weirder if he was alive and hadn't been this entire time. Like he came back to life or something, but whatever.
There's this scene where Milo's like, what about that? Because he pulls out a picture of Madeleine, and Milo's like, hey, what about that color picture you had? You know, the one of her in a red dress? And I love when black and white television shows and movies, like, because you can't see the color, just throw in random lines here and there where they tell you the color of things so that you know, I guess. Like I was watching Mildred Pierce last night, and at some point she goes, someone goes, oh yes, that guy with the beautiful brown eyes, which is like just completely out of context. You're like, wow, thank you for telling me that he has brown eyes in this black and white picture.
Well, they do it later on too, where Milo Clancy is dealing with some red wires. It's interesting. Like, you know, it's something that speaks to, like, there's this disconnect in these old shows between what you're seeing and what the characters are ostensibly seeing that doesn't exist in newer TV because of color.
Mm-hmm.
And when that's pointed out, it kind of takes you out of that moment.
Yeah. They should just pretend like the entire Doctor Who universe was in black and white until the third Doctor was exiled. And part of his exile was the Time Lords making the universe color.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if the entire world, like if we lived in a black and white world? Like I know there are people who are like colorblind, but imagine if we all just lived in a black and white world and then one day suddenly gained access to color. Like what weird colors would like desks or pens be if we didn't know the color?
I mean, in a way, like that's actually true, because there are things like that we can't see, and there are like sounds that we can't hear, and there's so much like we don't have access to, and like if we could get access to all of that naturally, then like, you know, I mean, it almost is like the case that we're living in this black and white world, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like not only that, okay, even just on this show, like the TARDIS console, you assume is white, right, or some shade close to white. But then, like when you see the behind the scenes pictures, it's actually like cream teal colored.
Yeah.
Because when it comes across in black and white, like the way that looks on grayscale is that it looks nice, basically.
Never forget the Doctor Who on Twitch thing where people thought the TARDIS was red.
Again, that's one of those things, like in black and white, you wouldn't know what colors. So, like, what if the whole world was black and white and then all of a sudden we got color? Like, what weird colors would everything be?
Yeah. Anyway, the reason why Dom Sigri is alive is that Cavan just kept him alive, and he thought the best place to do that would be in the study that Madeline had like decided to lock up and never go into again.
Yeah, at first I thought she had it locked up because she knew he was in there, but then when Cavan reveals that he's alive, she's like, wait, what?
There's a bit here where Dervish is Cavan's right-hand man, who we haven't mentioned up until now, but he's holding Madeline at gunpoint, and it seems as if we're about to go into his entire backstory, and I was like, please no, please don't let this happen, and it doesn't, thankfully.
Well, we did kind of gloss over the fact that the space pirates have this cunning plan to remote, because they find the Liz 79. They have this cunning plan to remote control it and launch it into space, and then allow it to be destroyed by Space Corps. And then they think that if Space Corps destroys the Liz 79, they'll believe Milo Clancy was in charge of the thing and leave. and then they'll be able to commit more acts of piracy completely unhindered by a Space Corps.
Right.
Milo Clancy gets back on the Liz 79 before it takes off, though, which I don't think they accounted for. The Doctor gets gassed by the spaceship taking off.
Well, okay, hold on a second. So, if they let Milo Clancy die here, then like they're not going to have their little scapegoat, person to point the finger at when Space Corps is onto them, right? So like, wouldn't it be a much better plan to like keep Milo Clancy alive so the Space Corps can just put the blame on him whenever they do something?
I never said it was a good plan.
Yeah, I didn't actually put that together until now. But anyway, yeah, like you said, Clancy is back on the Liz 79. And I think episode 5 ends with Cavan taking control of the ship. I think we're into episode 6 now.
Episode 5 ends with the Doctor getting gassed by the takeoff.
Oh, yeah. And episode 6 is, I don't know about you, but I felt that episode 6 was the biggest drag of all of them. Like, this story was just about to be done, but then episode 6 comes at you out of nowhere with like 24 more minutes. Here we go.
Well, so yes, but not only that, like when I watched this in kind of an unorthodox way because I sat down, I was like, I'm just going to watch this whole thing straight through, right? And I was on board till most of the way through episode 3 because it was actually like, until that point, it was actually moving at a pretty good pace. Episode 4, it started to drag and I was like, starting to lose motivation. I was like, morale was going down on the troops. We were crossing the Potomac. And then episode 5 hit, and it was winter in Russia, and we were Leningrad was like so far in the distance. It was we were like, nah, screw this. So I didn't watch episode 6 till 6 hours later because I was like so demotivated after episode 5. So by the time I even got to episode 6, I was already like so not down to have to watch another 25 minutes of the story. Yeah. And then it was just it was episode 6.
Half of this episode, well, not half, but a lot of this episode is the Doctor essentially giving Milo Clancy directions as to how to regain control of the Liz 79, which in itself is a weird thing because you'd think Clancy would know how to do that himself because it's his own ship, and the Doctor's presumably never seen it before in his life.
Except when he was on it earlier, I guess.
Yeah. So that like entire sequence, I think, just brings this episode down, and I think makes episode 6 the worst episode of these.
Well, also because there's nothing really else happening. Hermack is dicking around thinking he's got everything figured out. And then I have a note here that I wrote. I genuinely have lost track of what's happening.
Well, so the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe, like, they get Dervish. I don't even remember if they ever explain what happens to him, but they knock him out or something.
And I have a note that says Dervish make bomb, Dervish make boom. Yeah, Dom's on the ship too. Dom's on the Liz 79 as well. Because Milo Clancy has this line where it's like, it's just like the good old times, Dom.
Right. And Dom is just like so, emaciated. And
he's like starving.
Probably about to pass out.
Doesn't remember anything.
Doesn't even know where he is or who he is. Milo Clancy's just there like living it up like it's the good old days. But eventually, I think one of the biggest reasons why all of this is so not compelling is that it just works in the end. There's really no setbacks. There's nothing. It just works.
And Hermack comes down and discovers Madeline was the one in charge of it all along and just pretends like, yep, got the right man in the end and I didn't completely bugger it up getting here.
Yeah, Hermack is like not going to come under purview for what he's done in this, and that's really just the biggest slap in the face of all of this is he's going to get away scot-free.
It's going to take them 2 months to get back to home planet, so...
Remember in Blake 7 when what's his face these characters' names are on the tip of my tongue, but like the older like guy in control of the London like takes the younger guy aside and he's like, so we're gonna like cover this up, right? And he's like, yeah, I guess if you're saying so.
I imagine that with Hermac and Ian, like Hermac taking Ian aside, it's like, okay, make sure you don't tell anyone that I thought it was Milo at first, okay? Just pretend like I always thought it was Madeleine, okay?
Right.
My final note here is, quote, I don't know how to thank you, unquote. She leaves. And I remember when I wrote this down, I thought it was really funny. And I was like, oh man, this is really funny. Make a point of this. And now I have absolutely no idea what this is referring to. So, whoops.
Yeah, happens.
And then it ends on this. It ends with the most Blake 7 ending of all time, because they're like, oh, the TARDIS is on this other planet. It's going to take us 2 days to get there on Milo's ship. And Jamie's like, oh God, I can't stand another day on Milo's ship. I'd rather walk. And the Doctor goes something like, huh, what's that? Well, you might have to. And they all laugh. And then the credits roll.
Yeah, there's a Blake 7 ending.
I'd like to see that story, which is the Doctors, Zoe, Jamie, Don, and Milo Clancy trapped in the Liz 79 for 2 days, driving each other wild.
In real time, like 48-hour story.
Oh, I was gonna say like a better Edge of Destruction.
Yeah, maybe. So I don't know if you had any topics you wanted to touch on, but I just had one, and it kind of relates to something we've been touching on for this entire episode.
I just got the one, but you go ahead first.
Yeah, so mine is that, like, the story kind of expects you to care about, like, I know we were talking about how this creates this in-depth, like, sci-fi world with, like, a lot of backstory and mostly succeeds with that, but I think one thing it doesn't succeed on is that, like, it expects you to care about all aspects of this world right away. You know, we're given so much in-depth info about, like, how long it takes to get to places and, like, the speeds of the ships and some of the more intricate details of the ships. I think that stuff works when you're, like, super invested in the world. Again, perhaps like Star Wars, where it's like, you know, Luke's traveling to, I'm forgetting the name of the planet.
Tashi Station?
No.
Tatooine.
No.
Endor.
The planet where Yoda is. I can't believe
Dagobah.
Yeah. Is it Dagobah? Yeah. Can't believe I forgot that. I guess just goes to show you how much I, like, don't care much about Star Wars anymore. Yeah, I legitimately don't care about Star Wars anymore.
Shocking.
But like, yeah, it kind of works after like a movie and a quarter. But like, I don't know, I feel like this episode just throws these things at you and is like and expects you to care about like the time scale of this stuff, and I just don't.
Yeah, I can see that. I like talking about it. I actually appreciate the world that Robert Holmes has built here, because I actually think the world is a lot more detailed than we may have given it credit for at first, and I like that. I like there's a lot of backstory, but I'm gonna have to agree with you that like we're told that we're meant to care about it when we're not really shown a reason why we should care about it, you know?
Yeah, I think maybe if like the time stuff actually had to do with something that put the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe in danger or was a problem for them, then we might actually be more invested in it.
Right. Yeah, if it was like, because it's going to take them 2 hours to get there, they may not arrive in time to save Zoe or Jamie or whoever's in trouble. But instead, things like that are just, they're in the background. And so because of that, you probably wouldn't care unless you do an hour and a half podcast about it where you dissect the story. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I wanted to talk about is something that we definitely didn't notice the first time we watched this. That there's only one female character in this who isn't Zoe. And at first, when she showed up, I was like, oh, cool, she's the main villain. Like, this is actually pretty progressive. She's got a major role. She's the main villain. Well, she was running her company and the planet, basically. She was in charge. I was like, wow, you know, for Doctor Who at the time, this is, like, pretty forward thinking. But then, like, by the end of the episode, there's this kind of weird thing. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but there's this weird thing where, like, the buffoon Hermac and Ian, who got trapped for half the story, take her to prison, and then they pat themselves on the back. They're like, it almost feels like, yes, men saving the day again. That Madeleine, she was too dangerous, and we caught her. We did that. We did that. Oh,
yeah, maybe it just goes to show you, like, I know we were talking about this the other week or a couple of months ago, I guess now, but like, just goes to show you that, like, women are like covered up by history or whatever. Like, if this was Madeline was definitely a part of bringing Cavan to well, not to justice, but like to to death, I guess. But like, Cavan dies, right? I'm not misremembering that.
I'm sure he does.
They like launch him into the sun or something. But like, yeah, in the end, it's just Ian and Hermac who like take all the credit for it, and who actually overshadow the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe as well.
Yeah, there's this interesting thing about the story too, where it's one of the most incidental to the Doctor stories, by which I mean, like, this is one of those stories where the Doctor is just a party in the events and not driving the plot forward or doing any grand saving. He's just happens to be there along for the ride for this whole thing.
Yep. That's why I always, I know we're talking about a lot about Blake 7, but maybe it has to do with like the space western type stuff that's going on in this story, which Blake 7 had an element of as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that episode written by what was his name? The guy who wrote now I'm blanking on the other episode he wrote too. Was like the Battle of the Sexes episode of Blake 7.
Oh.
And what was that guy's name who wrote that?
Good question.
I'm sure as soon as we stop recording, I'm going to remember all the names of the episodes and the guy. But whatever. It's in Series D. It's like a first or second.
Was it Power?
Yeah, it was Power.
It was written by Ben Steed.
Yeah, Ben Steed was his name. People always point to his episodes as like containing sexism or promoting it, and I think his first story definitely or almost definitely does. But like, I think Power, I think people are highly like doing this shallow reading of Power, right? Because in that episode, like, it's the men in that episode are like total idiots, yet they're like winning the war or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the whole like, thrust of the episode, right? Is like, even though they're stupid as hell, like, in the end they're going to come out victorious because of like whatever this social systems or structures or whatever that have facilitated that. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I feel like people point to that episode as promoting sexist themes or whatever, or sexism in real life, when I actually think it's doing the opposite.
Where it's calling it out because it's like it's so incredulous that these buffoons would win. But
right. But that's like, how it really is,
That's how it is now. the men win. And I feel like there is kind of an element of that here too, because Hermac and Ian are just such bumbling before Ian less so, because Ian's the one who's actually like, are you sure Milo's like the leader? Like, it doesn't make any sense, Hermac. And Hermac's like, no, Milo is the leader.
Right. It's also not a coincidence that Ian is foreign in that relationship. Just saying. Mm-hmm. Like, right, Hermac is, well, he's, I think, supposed to be Russian, but he's British, and Ian is supposed to be American. Yeah. So I don't think that that's a coincidence that he's like, this foreign guy is like the voice of reason.
And maybe Bob Holmes put more into this story than I realized. Like, maybe that's the thing. Maybe he's calling out in his own way, in some way, calling out Doctor Who for the British guy always being the one who's like, yes, I have won over all of my contemporaries, including this incredibly intelligent woman who is much smarter than I am, and this foreigner who has been calling me out for the past 5 episodes. It is I who have claimed a victory for this British man.
Maybe that's why. Well, we don't know why. We don't know whether or why the Russian thing was dropped. Because just because he's named Nikolai doesn't necessarily mean he's supposed to be Russian. But that one line kind of indicates that maybe he
we
was.
are going to be too late again.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's always the possibility we're just reading way into this. But you know what? I'm going to open the call up for our audience to think about this one.
Yeah, you know what? Look, if nobody proves us wrong, then we're right.
That's not how that works. That's not how that works. We're just perpetuating the dynamics that this episode was either playing into unintentionally because it's the times, or was calling out because Bob Holmes was calling it out. You know, But yeah, no, that's. I think that's the conclusion of my thoughts on this story. Besides, yeah, I actually didn't think it was as bad as I remembered. I don't think it's necessarily a good story, but I don't think it was as bad as I remembered it being. I think I bumped it up to a 4 out of 10 now. I don't know why we're giving numbers now.
No, I definitely don't think it's as bad as I remembered it being. I think after having discussed it, I enjoyed it a lot more. Appreciate what it's doing more, especially with like the model work and creating like its own little sci-fi universe that I kind of wish was brought back, honestly.
Yeah, I almost feel like maybe this story would be held in a little bit higher regard if the ideas that it introduced were brought back somehow. Although I will kind of throw a bone to the show that would be incredibly difficult with the way the show goes, because next week is the War Games, and after that we get the third Doctor who gets exiled to Earth, and so bringing this back would have to happen when the Doctor escapes Earth, which doesn't happen for another, I guess, 6 years, because it's like series 10 or 11, I want to say. So,
but there's still a chance, series 13 is coming sooner or later, and we can still get some space pirates lore,
Chris,
and show them
Chibi,
show everyone that they do have respect for the lore.
Chibi, if you send me a tweet or if you DM me,
yeah, just
Keon and I will write this for you.
Email, Chris.
Yeah, shoot us an email.
We know you're listening.
I would consider it the greatest moment of my life if I found out someone who wrote for Doctor Who or was a producer on Doctor Who listened to our podcast. That would be like the highlight of my life.
Yeah, you know what? The greatest moment in my pathetic life was when Louise Jameson replied to me on Twitter, and I was dumb enough to not even reply back. I just liked the tweet.
Keon. We were this close to greatness. What is it?
We had the keys to salvation, but we chose condemnation. I think that's I don't remember where that line is from, but I always remember it, and I think it's from that movie Black Box or whatever, about that like button that gives you $1 million every time you press it, but it kills some random person in the world.
At first you were like, we came looking for copper, but we found gold, and then you threw it all away. Well, the good news is you could message Katie Manning on Twitter, and she'll probably reply because she responds to a lot of people.
Yeah. Wait, I could actually just go back, scroll through Twitter, and reply to that tweet now, 5 years later.
She would be like, what are you doing? Who are you? All right, so we received 2 emails this week. Both of them arrived after we recorded the Massacre episode, which is more of a problem for the first email, but still a problem for the second email, because they both pertain to that. So the first one is from Very Pete on Twitter. He reached out over email because he also tweeted at us, and I guess he really wanted to make sure we got the message. He wrote, so the subject line is, to reiterate my tweet, re the Massacre Recon. No. In all caps. And then there's a screenshot of his tweet. Don't rewatch The Massacre Recon. The TV soundtrack release with linking narration from Purvis makes all the difference. Moments like this are actually dramatic when you've got him saying something like, furiously, she flung the death warrants towards him or whatever. And then he has a picture of Loose Cannon Episode 3 reconstruction. She throws some papers in front of him. And then he says, I can hit you with MP3s of the version I'm on about if you like, or just go ahead and rewatch the 5 existing photos for 90 minutes. I mean, it's your show, your call. Well... Very Pete, it arrived. Your email and your tweet arrived after we had already not only watched, but I think they arrived after we had recorded already as well. Although, like I said in the episode, I'm not sure how much more exciting they draw their swords and then you don't hear any fighting could be made. I mean, any fighting that happens and things like that, or creative interpretation would be, shall we say, distancing itself from the original vision of the episode, and in my opinion, maybe you're reviewing a completely different episode, a completely different story.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think his point was that, like, when you, because the loose cannon reconstructions, I think, are the text, the scrolling text or whatever at the bottom of the screen is written in like a very dry manner. And I think that's, done purposely and probably is a good thing because, it just tries to represent what would have happened on screen as succinctly and just as straightforwardly as possible. But I think his point was that, like, when you listen to this version that's actually narrated or is, closer to like a book or something, then you get like more interesting more interesting prose, I guess.
Well, yeah, of course. And I think I seem to remember that the loose cannon reconstructions were made from like the stage notes, which is why they're so like blisteringly dry. Because it's like, this is what we would have told the actors to do, is like throw the papers in front of.
Right.
But I guess my point is that at that point, why not just read the book?
Sure.
The book is probably like, if you want the most interesting prose and you want the most quote complete unquote version, just read the book, the Target novelization.
Yeah, and I was thinking that, like, we could have done that for this run of stories, is like go back to the ones we didn't like and read the book and see if that's better. But I mean, instead we decided to do this.
Yeah, because again, like the book and the audio with linking narration and even the reconstruction to an extent are all not necessarily reboots, but they're like reinterpretations of the story as it would have been told, right? So
yep.
It just depends like how far you want to actually stray from what was shown on screen. I mean, you can sit here and you can have Peter Purvis tell me that she's furiously flinging the death warrants towards him, but if you go back to the reconstruction and I don't remember exactly, and you listen to the actual recording, like maybe she actually, like if you listen to the papers, maybe she literally just throw them down on the desk in front of her, like really unenergetically, like maybe that's a creative interpretation that they made to make the story more interesting. And then you have to ask, like, is that then representative of the original quality of the story itself, or was it made better later on?
No, well, I mean, obviously I'm just putting words in his mouth at this point, but I don't think like the point is that like this soundtrack with the narration or the book or anything else is like a better representation than the reconstruction. I think the point is that it's just better. Like,
well, yeah, no, I understand that, and I probably agree to an extent, but I'm also saying that's like, I guess my thing is people judge the quality of the story based on the audio with the linking narration, whatever. And what I'm saying is like, that's like a reinterpretation of the story though. So like, how close is it actually to, and the same goes for the reconstruction. Like, how close is it actually to what we would have originally seen? Like, we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think also our idea behind this entire string of episodes is to go back to ones that we maybe didn't give a fair shot because we either didn't know as much about Doctor Who or just didn't care, or didn't do research because we barely did any research at all back then, even less than we do now. And I'm glad we're doing that with the episodes themselves, because I kind of want to give some of the episodes that I remember despising back then another chance.
Well, yeah, that's actually a good segue into our next email, where we can justify a little more why we're doing this. So this is actually one of the most serious emails we've ever received, and I don't say that as a joke. This email from Sergeant Drano. Guys, I have to say that I'm very disappointed that you're deciding to delay Torchwood for another 7 weeks while you go over retreads of the worst Doctor Who episodes you've already covered. I'm sure I am not the only one who's been looking forward to you covering Torchwood for a really long time now. That was honestly the biggest thing I was looking forward to when it came to you guys finally catching up with current Doctor Who. I was mildly annoyed when you delayed your coverage with those 2 not great Peter Cushing movies, and now I am genuinely upset at the prospect of waiting almost 2 more months when I previously thought we were almost finally there. I feel like the Torchwood rug got yanked out from under my feet just as I was about to jump on it. I really hope you guys will reconsider. Sergeant Drano, Station 7, The Door. Well, that is a respectable opinion. I think the reason why we did the 2 Doctor Who movies, at least on my mind, was because I wanted to make it to episode 300 before we started Torchwood, and also because it was like Doctor Who content that we hadn't seen before, and I was always curious about it. That was my reason for suggesting it to Keon, anyway, when I brought it up.
Yeah, we're gonna have to watch those movies at some point, and this was that point.
In terms of revisiting old stories, I think Keon hit the nail on the head. I think it's a matter of we didn't really give a lot of these stories the fair shake. Since we break from fan opinion a lot, especially so with something like The Massacre, which most people hold in very high regard, and we don't. And I'm sure that's true for some of the other stories that we have coming up. I know next week we're doing The Monster of Peladon, which I don't think is held as in low regard as we seemed to have held it in at the time. And I think part of the reason why we're doing this is to maybe go back and say, like, well, were we wrong? Like, did we get it wrong? You know, not necessarily wrong, so to speak, but I think you get my point here.
Yeah,
and to give these old stories another fair shake and some time in the sun, and perhaps to stoke some discussion. I mean, like this week with the Space Pirates, I think we definitely went a lot more in depth than we did the first time. I think we did a lot more research into the production history and the model work and the world that Robert Holmes tried to build. And when we did this the first time, we obviously didn't know the impact Robert Holmes would have on the show. We didn't know what his future stories would hold, what kind of themes he liked to hit on, what he liked to develop in his stories. And those are all things that, looking back on the story now, I think are easier to pick out. Like, oh yeah, this is Robert Holmes' story. You know, here's this, here's that. And I think that's probably going to continue for the next 5 weeks worth of stories.
Yeah, I think so.
I understand that people are probably not thrilled that we're delaying Torchwood yet again. Keep in mind, we could have just canceled Torchwood. That was.
Wow.
I mean, I joke,
Wow.
but that was something we considered. Like, we did consider just going, like, what if we just don't even do Torchwood? Like, we could just not and just do books and audios for however long it takes us to get back to the television show. Like, that was an option we had discussed. Another option we had discussed was not doing 7 weeks, of doing 14, doing both the worst and the best for every classic Doctor.
Well, we're still doing that. We're just doing them after Torchwood.
Yeah,
I guess I'm just revealing right now.
One of the things we discussed was doing it all before Torchwood and being like, well, like, did we get the worst stories right? But did we also get the best stories right? And yeah, like Keon said, that's something we've decided to do after Torchwood now, because I think we were cognizant of the fact that people want us to do Torchwood, so we moved half of that plan to after Torchwood.
Yeah, I still don't know how this is all going to fit in with, like, whenever the next season comes out. Like, do we just stop and watch that, or do we finish this entire plan?
I mean, at the rate we're going, we'll probably be done with this entire plan by the time the show comes back, because they can't start production right now, because they can't start filming because of the virus. And once they start filming, it'll be about a year till the show comes out. So assuming they start filming in the fall, that means we won't get this till the fall of 2021, at least, maybe the winter. And by then, I feel confident that we'll have gotten through most, if not all, of Torchwood.
Probably.
Another thing that we were cognizant of the fact is that we would have to acquire Torchwood somehow, and we were woefully unprepared to do so when we watched the second Doctor Who in the Daleks movie. So,
yeah.
Because I think we both want to acquire it legitimately, and that required some forethought on our parts that we hadn't put in at that point.
Right.
I will freely admit that. But I appreciate you expressing your opinion, Sergeant Drano, and I respect it, and I understand why people, because I'm sure you're right, I'm sure you're not the only one who is upset that we delayed Tortured, and I understand why people are upset. But rest assured, there will be no more delays after this revisiting of some old classics.
Yeah.
Except unless we take a week off to take a break, but I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I don't think that's happening.
Remember, if we stop, we die. I mean, I could feel the grim chill and specter of death creeping up on me just by you saying that.
You could feel his icy hand on your shoulder.
I know. Curling around my neck.
Well, I have gone over the emails I have. That concludes everything I have for this episode.
Yep, same here.
Yeah, so for next week, the Third Doctor is interesting because I didn't remember a serial and specifically was like, yeah, that story sucked, or we hated that story, or I hated that story. And I think you had the same thing because I know we had difficulty figuring out what we were going to do for the Third Doctor originally. So I went into the Trust Your Doctor archives. I pulled up the Planet of the Spiders episode and I listened to it. We didn't originally explicitly say what we thought the worst story was, but then I found it buried in one line, in a completely unrelated topic, I might add. We just dropped that we seem to be in roughly unison agreement that the Monster of Peladon was the story we disliked the most from the Third Doctor's era. Which,
that's weird because I don't remember, like, in the past, 5-ish years ever, like, saying that again, you know?
That was something we talked about on the episode. We were like, there's nothing in here. We also, like, for the Second Doctor in that episode, we said that, what was it, this Warrior Fury from the Deep, I think, was the worst Second Doctor story, which, whoops.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I think it's actually for the best that we watched the Space Pirates instead of that, because like what resulted from there was not us saying that was the worst. Like for the next 5 years, we always just said that the Space Pirates was the worst. Right.
But yeah, I think we said this in our Third Doctor retrospective / episode where we said pretty much straight up, we went, there wasn't a story in the Third Doctor's era that we would say was, quote, massacre level bad, unquote, or even that bad. We basically seem to agree that most stories of the Third Doctor were at least mediocre to good. And Monster of Peladon was the lowest of the bunch. So that was back before we started conflating Curse of Peladon and Monster of Peladon too. I do remember us disliking Monster of Peladon because it has that 10-minute scene where Sarah Jane just espouses beliefs at King Peladon with like no plot relevance or like not moving the plot forward at all.
It had plot relevance, but I think we just didn't think it fit in because of how, I don't know,
blunt it was?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. And I think that's one scene that we're definitely going to reevaluate. I don't know if we'll change our opinions. I don't even really remember what my opinion was based on because I barely remember the scene to begin with. But I think that's definitely going to be the topic of some re-examination.
That whole story is going to be a re-evaluation because I barely remember the plot of the story.
Yeah, same here.
So there you go. If there's anyone who'd like to reach out and email us, thoughts about Monster of Peladon, Underworld the week after, you can reach us at thedoctor@decoratevegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on our little Redux revisit. We are looking for any and all opinions, like Sergeant Drano reaching out. We always appreciate when our fans reach out. Sometimes more so if their opinions are counter to ours because it gives us a different perspective. At least that's how I feel. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. That's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, all at Trust Your Doctor. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next time, like we mentioned, we're going to be watching The Monster of Peladon. But until then, the end.